There's a language to a house, a rhythm that you only learn by living in it. For years, the language of our home was written in a dialect of pure joy, articulated by the boundless energy of my daughter, Lily. It was in the high-pitched squeal of laughter that echoed from the living room as she built towering castles out of cushions, only to demolish them with a gleeful roar. It was in the frantic scribbling of crayons on paper, a sound that always promised a new masterpiece for the refrigerator gallery. A gallery already overflowing with lopsided rainbows, smiling stick figure families, and a particularly abstract portrait of our golden retriever, Buster. Lily, at 8 years old, was not just a child. She was a force of nature. She believed that squirrels held important meetings in the oak tree outside her window, and that the moon was a giant cookie that a celestial mouse took a bite from each night. Her world was vibrant, magical, and she invited us all to live in it with her. My husband, Mark, and I were her willing subjects, her captive audience, her co-conspirators in a world painted with wonder. The change, when it came, wasn't a sudden storm, but a slow, creeping fog. It began with the quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping child, but a heavy, unsettling stillness that felt alien within our walls. The cushioned castles remained unbuilt. The crayons lay dormant in their box, their sharp tips a reminder of an energy that had simply vanished. At first, I made excuses for it. A tiring day at school, the beginning of a cold, the natural ebb and flow of a child's moods. Mark, ever the optimist, saw it as a sign of maturity. "She's growing up, Clara," he'd say, his voice a comforting murmur as he'd find me standing motionless in the hallway, just listening to the silence. "She's not a little girl anymore. She's developing her own inner world." I wanted to find comfort in his words, to believe that this was just a normal, healthy transition. But a mother's intuition is a stubborn, primal thing. It's a low hum beneath the surface of reason, and my intuition was screaming that this wasn't growth. This was retreat. The conversations became the hardest part. I'd try to draw her out, to find a spark of the old Lily. "How was your day, sweet pea? Did anything funny happen?" "It was fine," she'd reply, her eyes following the patterns on the tablecloth. Her voice, once a bright, bubbling spring, was now a shallow brook, barely a whisper. The word fine became a wall I couldn't seem to climb over. The breaking point for me came during a phone call with my older sister, Sarah. Sarah is a woman built of pragmatism and solid advice. She raised 2 confident, outgoing boys, and she navigates the world with a certainty I've always envied and never been able to replicate. I called her one Tuesday evening, my voice tight with a worry I could no longer contain. She didn't want to read tonight, I told her, the words tumbling out. "We've read a chapter of our book every single night since she was 4. Tonight, she just shook her head and turned away. She just closed her eyes." On the other end of the line, there was a pause, followed by a patient sigh. It was the sigh I knew all too well. It was the precursor to a dose of sensible, sisterly advice that always left me feeling foolish. "Clara, for heaven's sake," she began, her tone gentle but firm. "She's probably just tired. You're putting so much pressure on these little rituals. The book, the special dinner, the questions. Maybe she just needs a break from it all. Maybe she needs a break from you hovering over her, analyzing her every move." I flinched even though I was alone in my kitchen. "I'm not hovering, Sarah. I'm concerned. Something is wrong. I can feel it." "You feel it," she repeated, and though she didn't mean it to be cruel, the words stung. "You felt that she was going to have a terrible time at summer camp, and she ended up loving it. You felt that her first-grade teacher disliked her, and then she became her favorite. You are a wonderful mother, Clara, but you are also a born dramatist. You're looking for a storm in a puddle." That's when I told her about the drawing. A few days prior, I'd been tidying Lily's room and found a piece of paper shoved deep into the pocket of her backpack. It was a drawing, but not like her others. This one was in pencil, all gray and black. It showed a small figure, unmistakably a little girl, standing alone in the corner of a box. Outside the box, other figures were playing, their shapes indistinct but clearly together. The little girl inside the box had no mouth. "She said I was overdramatic," I whispered into the phone, my throat closing up. "That's what you're saying now." Sarah was silent for a moment. "A drawing of a girl in a box? Honey, that's just called imagination. It's probably something from a story or a cartoon. You're attaching your own anxieties to it. Please, for your own sake and for Lily's, just take a step back. Let her breathe. She's fine." We ended the call, and I stood there in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator loud in the silence. Sarah's words echoed in my head, logical and cutting, overdramatic, anxious, Hovering. Was that who I was? Was I the creator of this problem, projecting my own fears onto my happy, healthy child? I looked towards the hallway that led to Lily's room. The door was closed. The silence that came from behind it felt heavier than ever, and I had never felt more alone. For 3 days, I lived a lie. I wore the mask of the relaxed, unbothered mother that Sarah had prescribed. I bit back the flood of questions that rose in my throat every time Lily entered a room. I forced my hands to stay busy with household chores when all they wanted to do was reach out and smooth the worry from my daughter's brow. I became an actress in my own home, playing a role I was horribly miscast for. My script was full of cheerful, breezy lines. "Have a wonderful day at school, sweetie," I'd call out, my voice a pitch higher than usual. "Dinner will be whatever you feel like tonight." Mark, bless his heart, saw my effort and played along, believing it was a genuine step towards equilibrium. He saw my forced smiles and took them for the real thing. "See? It's better, isn't it?" he said one evening as we washed the dishes in a silence that felt less companionable and more like a carefully observed ceasefire. "Just letting things be. It's a good feeling." I just nodded, unable to tell him that inside I was a coiled spring of unasked questions and unexpressed fears. The knot in my stomach hadn't loosened. It had simply learned to hide. The charade came crashing down on a Saturday morning. Saturdays were once our sacred day, a day for pancake breakfasts, trips to the park, or building epic forts in the living room. I was determined to resurrect this tradition. I filled the kitchen with the smell of sizzling bacon and buttermilk pancakes, putting on a playlist of upbeat songs that once formed the soundtrack to our mornings. Lily came downstairs, dressed but moving with a slowness that seemed to take a monumental effort. She sat at the table, her small shoulders slumped. I placed a pancake, shaped like a smiling cat, in front of her. It was a trick that had never failed to earn a giggle. "I made you a kitty cat pancake," I said, my voice straining to sound playful. She looked at it, her expression unreadable. She picked up her fork, nudged one of the chocolate chip eyes, and then set the fork back down. "I'm not very hungry," she murmured, her gaze drifting to the window. And just like that, my performance was over. The mask crumbled. I knelt beside her chair, my heart aching with the effort of the last few days. "Honey, you have to talk to me," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "If something is wrong, if someone hurt you, you can tell me. You can tell me anything." She flinched, pulling away from my touch as if it burned her. "Nothing's wrong," she said, her voice sharp with an uncharacteristic irritation. "Why do you keep asking that?" She pushed her chair back, stood up, and walked out of the room, leaving me kneeling on the kitchen floor with a smiling pancake and the wreckage of my composure. Later that day, the phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice was bright, decisive. "Right, I've had an idea," she announced, not waiting for a hello. "The boys are with their father this weekend, and I am officially bored. I'm driving down to you. I'll be there by dinner. We'll have a girls' night, order pizza, and you can finally get a break from all this worry. I'll bring that fancy ice cream you like." My heart sank. It was a gesture of kindness, of love, but it felt like an inspection. She wasn't coming to support me. She was coming to assess me. She was coming to see with her own eyes that the house was not, in fact, shrouded in a dark cloud of misery, but that the only storm was the one in my head. "Oh, Sarah, you don't have to do that," I said weakly. "Nonsense. The decision is made. It will be fun. I can't wait to see my favorite niece." And with that, she hung up. Sarah arrived precisely at 6, sweeping into the house like a gust of fresh, competent air. She brought with her 2 bags of groceries, a bottle of wine, and an oversized box of Lego for Lily. Her energy was overwhelming, filling the quiet spaces with a cheerful authority that made my own anxiety feel shabby and unwelcome. She found Lily in the living room, curled up on the armchair with a book. "There she is," Sarah boomed, dropping the bags and enveloping Lily in a hug that seemed to startle her. Lily stiffened for a moment before melting into it, a silent surrender. Sarah held her at arm's length, studying her face. "Well, look at you," she said, her voice softening. "You've gotten so big. Too big for your auntie's hugs?" Lily gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Sarah straightened up, turning to me with a triumphant, knowing smile. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, even though Lily was just a few feet away. "See?" she mouthed silently, her eyes sparkling with "I told you so" confidence. "She's fine. A little shy, maybe, but she's perfectly fine. You, my dear sister, need to pour yourself a very large glass of wine." She patted my arm, a gesture of both affection and dismissal, before turning her attention back to unpacking her bags, leaving me to stand there, feeling like a ghost in my own home. The evening unfolded exactly as Sarah had orchestrated it. It was a forced performance of normalcy, with my sister as the determined director and me as her reluctant, clumsy actor. We ordered pizza, the scent of melted cheese and pepperoni, a strange, artificial overlay on the thick silence that had become our home's natural atmosphere. Sarah kept up a lively monologue, recounting humorous anecdotes from her work, sharing gossip about old high school friends, and outlining her plans for a kitchen renovation. She directed most of her energy towards Lily, trying to coax her into the spotlight of her cheerfulness. "So, Lily Bean," she said, her voice booming with bonhomie as we sat around the dining table, "tell your Auntie Sarah what you're learning in school. Are you dissecting frogs yet? Your cousins loved that part. Drove their mother crazy, of course, bringing home all sorts of smelly things." Lily, who had arranged her single slice of pizza into a fortress wall on her plate, looked up. Her eyes were wide, but her voice was small. "We're learning about pioneers," she said quietly. "Pioneers! Fantastic!" Sarah declared, seizing the topic with gusto. "Brave people, the pioneers, forging new paths, building homes out of nothing but grit and determination. That's what life is all about, isn't it, Clara? You just have to be strong and push through." She looked pointedly at me, and the subtext was as clear as if she'd shouted it. "See? Even your daughter's schoolwork is telling you to toughen up." I offered Lily a weak smile, but she didn't see it. Her gaze had already returned to her plate, her attention fixed on pushing a stray piece of olive around with her fork. Mark, trying to be a bridge between the two worlds, asked Lily about the covered wagons they were studying, but her answers were monosyllabic, ghosts of words that vanished as soon as they were spoken. After dinner, as I cleared the plates, Sarah cornered me in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of pity and frustration. "You have to stop it, Clara," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "You're smothering her. The way you look at her, it's like you're waiting for her to break. Kids are resilient, but they're also mirrors. She is reflecting your anxiety right back at you. She's quiet because you've created this atmosphere of tragedy around her." "That's not true," I retorted, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "The atmosphere was here long before you arrived. I'm not creating it. I'm trying to navigate it." "By doing what? By interrogating her over a pancake? By staring at her with those sad, wounded eyes?" She sighed, her frustration softening slightly into a more familiar, sisterly tone. "Look, I know you love her more than anything, but your love is so loud. It's so intense. You need to trust her. You need to trust that she is okay." Her words were a punch to the gut because a part of me, a small, terrified part, wondered if she was right. What if my worry was a poison I was inadvertently feeding my own child? The thought was so horrific that it made me feel dizzy. The final act of the evening was movie night. Sarah chose a loud, colorful animated film, one of her boys' favorites. We all gathered in the living room. Sarah and Mark settled on the couch while I sat on the floor, leaning against a chair, wanting to be close to Lily, who had curled up in a beanbag in the corner. Halfway through the movie, during a chaotic, vibrant musical number, I glanced over at my daughter. She wasn't watching the screen. Her head was bent, and her hands were busy in her lap. For a moment, I thought she was just fidgeting, but then I saw the pencil and the small folded piece of paper she had pulled from the pocket of her jeans. She was drawing. Her movements were small, secretive, her body curved around the paper as if to shield it from the world. She drew with a focused intensity that was a stark contrast to the apathy she had shown all evening. My heart began to pound in my chest, a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't just a doodle. This felt different. This felt important. Sarah, catching my gaze, followed it to Lily. A small, self-satisfied smile touched her lips. She leaned forward and whispered to me across the room, her voice full of triumphant vindication. "See, Clara? What did I tell you? She's drawing. She's happy. She's in her own little world. She is fine." She leaned back, content, turning her attention back to the explosions of color on the television screen. But I couldn't look away from my daughter. The way she held her shoulders, the fierce, private concentration on her face. It wasn't the posture of a happy child lost in a world of imagination. It was the posture of a child documenting a painful secret, one she felt she had to keep hidden, even from the people who loved her most. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that whatever happened next, this fragile, forced peace was about to be shattered. The movie's credits rolled, filling the room with an aggressively cheerful song that felt like a cruel joke. The bright colors and upbeat music washed over the space where a family was pretending to be whole. Sarah stretched her arms over her head with a theatrical yawn, a picture of relaxed satisfaction. "Well," she announced to the room, her voice bright, "that was a riot. Exactly what the doctor ordered, right?" She stood up and began gathering her purse and keys from the side table, the very picture of a successful intervention. She was ready to deliver her closing remarks, her final gentle admonishment on the dangers of overthinking. But I couldn't move. My gaze was locked on the small figure in the beanbag chair. As the lights in the room came up, Lily blinked, as if waking from a trance. She saw me looking at her, and her reaction was instantaneous. Her hands flew to her lap, fumbling to conceal the small piece of paper. In her haste, her fingers lost their grip. The drawing, the secret she had been pouring her silent heart into, slipped from her grasp. It fluttered through the air for a single agonizing moment before landing, face down, on the soft rug between us. A loaded silence fell, heavier and more real than any that had come before. Lily froze, her eyes wide with a pure, primal panic. She looked like a small animal caught in the beam of an oncoming car. "Oh, what's this?" Sarah asked, her voice still coated in that infuriating, good-natured cheer. She saw the paper as nothing more than a child's craft. Another piece of evidence for her case. "Did you draw something for us, Lilybean? Let your auntie see." Before I could speak, before I could form the words, "Sarah, don't," she had already bent down. She swooped the paper up with a flourish, a magician revealing a simple, harmless trick. She turned it over. The world stopped. The smile on Sarah's face didn't just fade, it shattered. Her entire body seemed to deflate, her confident posture dissolving into a shocked, broken slump. The paper trembled in her hand. Her breath hitched in a raw, audible gasp. She looked from the drawing to Lily, and in that instant, the veil of her own certainty was ripped away. For the first time all night, she wasn't looking at her overdramatic sister's child. She was looking at a soul in torment. I moved then, my own limbs heavy with dread. I knelt on the floor beside Sarah, my eyes drawn to the terrible confession in her hand. It was so much worse than the first one. This drawing was filled with a harrowing clarity. The little girl was there, trapped inside a box, her mouth still a blank, empty space. But this time, the box was labeled. In shaky, childish letters, Lily had written, "Lily's cage." Outside the cage, the other figures were no longer indistinct shapes. They were children with sharp, jagged smiles and cruel, laughing eyes. They were pointing, and all around them, like a storm of poison, were words. Ugly, jagged words, the kind that slice into a child's spirit and leave wounds no one can see. Weirdo, crybaby, ugly, nobody likes you. My own breath caught in my throat. I looked at Lily. She was crying now, but not in the way she had before. These were not the silent, withdrawn tears of a hidden sadness. These were the terrified, hiccuping sobs of a child who had been found out. She thought she was in trouble. "I'm sorry," she choked out, her little body trembling. "I'm sorry. You weren't supposed to see." I reached for her, pulling her out of the beanbag and into my arms. She collapsed against me, burying her face in my shoulder. "Oh, baby," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. Can you tell me about the drawing? Who are these children?" And for the first time in months, the wall of fine crumbled into dust. The words came out haltingly at first, then in a flood of pain that had been dammed up for far too long. She told us about recess, about being pushed against the brick wall of the school. She told us about lunch, about eating alone in the corner of the cafeteria, because the other girls would take her food and call her fat. She told us her teacher, a young woman who was always busy, would just tell her to try harder to make friends. The cage, she explained through her tears, was her desk. It was the only place she felt safe, the only place the words couldn't reach her. She drew because it was the only way to let the hurt out without making a sound. Across the room, Sarah slowly sank onto the couch, her face pale, her expression one of utter devastation. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears of shame and regret. "Clara," she mouthed, the word a silent, desperate apology. "Oh God, Clara, what have I done?" Mark, who had been frozen in the doorway, rushed to our side, his face a mask of fury and heartbreak. He knelt with us, wrapping his strong arms around both me and our sobbing daughter, creating a fortress of love against the cruelty of the world. The silence in our home was finally, irrevocably broken. It had been replaced by the sound of a child's pain being brought into the light, and it was the most heartbreaking and most necessary sound I had ever heard. There is a sacredness to the moment a long-held secret is finally spoken aloud. The air in our living room was thick with it. Lily's sobs slowly subsided, replaced by the shaky, exhausted breaths of a child who had finally laid down an unbearable weight. She was still tucked tightly in my arms, her small body pliant and trusting in a way it hadn't been for months. I could feel Mark's hand on my back, a steady, grounding pressure that spoke of a shared, silent vow. Never again. Never again would our daughter feel so alone that she had to build a cage for her heart. The first person to truly move was Sarah. She rose from the couch, her movements slow and uncertain, as if she were learning to walk again. She came over to where we were huddled on the floor, a small, broken family unit, and knelt before us. Her face was stripped of all its earlier confidence, all its brisk certainty. It was tear-streaked and etched with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on Lily. "Lily," she said, her voice raw and barely a whisper. "I am so sorry." 2 large tears escaped her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. Auntie Sarah was wrong. I was so wrong. I didn't listen. You are so brave. Do you hear me? You are the bravest girl I have ever known. And I am so sorry I didn't see it. Lily, her face still pressed into my shoulder, turned her head just enough to look at her aunt. She didn't say anything, but she gave a small, hesitant nod, an acknowledgement that was more powerful than any words could have been. Sarah finally raised her eyes to meet mine. The apology in them was vast and deep. "Clara," she began, but her voice broke. She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. I just nodded back, letting her know it was okay. The time for blame was over. The time for healing had begun. We stayed like that for a long time, a tableau of grief and nascent hope on the living room floor. Eventually, Mark gently scooped a now drowsy Lily into his arms. "I think it's time for bed," he said softly, his voice thick with a father's protective love. "We'll talk in the morning, sweet pea, and we are going to fix this, I promise you." He carried her upstairs, and I heard the soft murmur of his voice as he tucked her in, a comforting sound that began to stitch our fractured home back together. When I came back downstairs, Sarah was sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at the drawing which was still on the coffee table. She looked up at me, her expression lost. "How could I have been so blind?" she asked, the question directed at the universe more than at me. "I was so busy trying to prove you wrong, so convinced that I knew best, that I refused to see what was right in front of me. I called your love loud, Clara. But it wasn't loud, it was clear. I was just the one who was deaf." I sat down beside her, the space between us no longer a chasm of misunderstanding, but a shared ground of sorrow. "You're not the only one who didn't see," I confessed, the guilt a bitter taste in my mouth. "The teacher, the other parents. I let everyone, make me doubt myself. I was so scared of being an overdramatic mother that I almost missed my daughter drowning right in front of me. That night, my sister and I didn't drink wine or share gossip. We made a plan. We laid out the steps we would take with a quiet, fierce determination. A meeting with the principal first thing Monday morning. A call to a child therapist Sarah knew through a friend. Someone who specialized in bullying. A promise to create a space where Lily could always speak her truth, no matter how painful it was. When Sarah finally left, long after midnight, she hugged me at the door. It wasn't her usual brisk pat-on-the-back hug. It was a desperate, clinging embrace. "Thank you for not giving up," she whispered into my ear. "Thank you for being loud." As I closed the door and leaned against it, the exhaustion I had been holding at bay for months washed over me. But beneath it there was something else. A flicker of strength. The knot in my stomach was gone, replaced by a firm, steady resolve. The silence in my house was no longer heavy with unspoken pain. It was just quiet. It was the quiet of a house that was waiting for the morning, ready to fight for its light. Monday morning arrived not with a sense of dread, but with a clarity that felt like a cold, clean dawn. I walked into the principal's office, flanked by Mark and Sarah. We were a united front, armed with the heartbreaking evidence of Lily's drawing, which I now carried not with shame, but with a righteous anger. The meeting was difficult. There were defensive tones and administrative jargon, but we did not waver. We were not there to accuse, but to demand action, to be the voice our daughter could not be for herself. We left that office with a concrete plan of action from the school and the assurance that Lily's safety, both physical and emotional, would become their #1 priority. The path to healing, however, didn't happen in a principal's office. It happened in the quiet, safe space of a therapist's room, a place filled with art supplies and a kind-faced woman named Dr. Evans who knew how to speak the language of children. Lily started her sessions hesitantly, but week by week, we saw pieces of her return. It started with small things. The sound of her humming to herself as she worked on her homework. The way she'd reach for my hand spontaneously when we walked through the grocery store. About 2 months into her therapy, she came home and, without a word, handed me a drawing. My heart clenched for a moment, a muscle memory of fear. But this drawing was different. It was bursting with color. In the center was a girl with a huge, smiling mouth. She was holding a key, and beside her was an open bird cage, a small bluebird flying out of it, soaring towards a bright yellow sun. In the corner, she had drawn our family, me, Mark, and even Aunt Sarah, all holding hands, watching the bird fly free. I framed this drawing and hung it in the very center of our refrigerator, a new centerpiece for our gallery of joy. Sarah became a different kind of sister, a different kind of aunt. The brisk certainty was replaced with a gentle, patient humility. She called every week not to offer advice, but simply to ask, "How is she? And how are you?" She learned to listen, truly listen, not just to the words but to the silences in between. She started a new tradition of art days with Lily, where the two of them would sit for hours, painting and drawing, communicating in a shared language of color and paper, no words needed. Life in our house found its rhythm again. It was a new rhythm, quieter than before perhaps, but deeper and more authentic. The laughter returned, not as a constant, boisterous storm, but as a warm and steady light. The silence that sometimes fell was no longer a heavy, menacing blanket, but a comfortable quiet, full of peace and the unspoken security of a family that had weathered a storm and learned how to truly see one another. Sometimes, late at night, I look at the drawing of the bluebird, and I remember the woman I was, the one who was so terrified of being called overdramatic. And I think about the most important lesson this journey has taught me. A mother's intuition is not drama. It is a compass. It is the quiet, insistent whisper of a love so profound it can feel the shifting tides in a child's soul. We live in a world that often dismisses these feelings, that tells us to be practical, to not overreact. But sometimes the most practical thing we can do is listen to that irrational, illogical, fiercely protective voice inside us. So if you feel it, if that quiet alarm bell starts to ring in your own heart, please, do not ignore it. Trust that love. It may not always be logical, and it may not always be convenient, but it is the purest, truest guide you will ever have. Listen to the whispers. Pay attention to the drawings you're not meant to see, for in those hidden corners, in those silent confessions, lies the truth. And bringing that truth into the light is the most important work we will ever do.